The fluorescent lights in the funeral home office buzzed overhead as Rebecca sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her 3-year-old twin daughters fidgeting beside her. The smell of artificial flowers and cleaning chemicals made her stomach turn. But she forced herself to focus on what the funeral director was saying. "Mrs. Johnson, we've gone through your husband's personal effects," the man said, sliding a small manila envelope across the wooden desk. His voice was professional but not unkind. "This is everything we found." Rebecca's hands shook as she picked up the envelope. 2 weeks had passed since David collapsed at the construction site where he worked. 2 weeks since the paramedics couldn't save him. 2 weeks since her world fell apart completely. The twins, Lily and Rose, were getting restless. They didn't understand why Mommy kept crying or why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. At 3 years old, death was too big a concept for their little minds to grasp. "Can we go see the pretty flowers again?" Lily whispered, tugging on Rebecca's worn jacket sleeve. "In a minute, baby," Rebecca whispered back, trying to keep her voice steady. Inside the envelope was a crumpled $5 bill and a piece of paper torn from David's work notebook. In his messy handwriting, it read, "For my beautiful girls, Daddy loves you forever." That was it. After 8 years of marriage and 3 years of being a father, this was all David had left them. Rebecca bit her lip hard to stop herself from breaking down right there in the office. The funeral director cleared his throat and pulled out another folder. "Mrs. Johnson, about the remaining balance on the funeral costs." She knew what was coming. They'd already used up their tiny savings account and borrowed against David's small life insurance policy just to give him a proper burial. The cheapest funeral package they offered was still more money than Rebecca had ever seen in one place. "How much do I still owe?" she asked quietly. $3,200. The number hit her like a physical blow. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. Rebecca worked part-time at the local grocery store, stocking shelves and running the cash register when they needed extra help. Even working every hour they'd give her, she barely made enough to cover rent and food for the 3 of them. I don't have that kind of money," she admitted, her cheeks burning with shame. The funeral director nodded sympathetically. "We can set up a payment plan. Small amounts each month." Rebecca wanted to laugh, but she was afraid if she started, she might become hysterical. Small amounts each month. She was already 3 months behind on rent. The electric company had shut off their power twice in the past month. Their landlord had been patient so far, but she could see the frustration building in his eyes every time she promised him the rent money was coming soon. "Yes, okay, a payment plan," she said, because what choice did she have? After signing more papers, Rebecca scooped up her daughters and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The contrast from the dim funeral home made her squint, and for a moment, she felt dizzy. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Rose said, pulling on Rebecca's other hand. Rebecca looked down at the $5 bill still clutched in her palm. $5. She could buy them each a small bag of chips and maybe a juice box, or she could save it for bus fare to get to work tomorrow. These were the kinds of impossible choices she faced every single day now. Their apartment was a 20-minute walk from the funeral home, through a neighborhood that had seen better days. The sidewalks were cracked and some of the streetlights didn't work anymore. But it was home, and it was all Rebecca could afford. The building where they lived was old, with thin walls and creaky floors. Their unit was on the 2nd floor, a studio apartment that barely had room for the 3 of them. David used to joke that it was cozy, but Rebecca knew he'd been saving every penny he could so they could move somewhere bigger. Somewhere the girls could have their own room. Now those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Rebecca unlocked their door and immediately noticed how stuffy it was inside. The air conditioning had been broken for months, and their landlord kept saying he'd fix it soon. The twins ran to their toy corner, really just a cardboard box filled with secondhand toys and coloring books that David had picked up from garage sales. "Can we have mac and cheese?" Lily asked, already, knowing what the answer would be. Mac and cheese was cheap, and Rebecca had learned to make it stretch by adding extra water and whatever vegetables she could find on sale. While the water boiled on their tiny stove, Rebecca sat on their bed, the only real furniture in the apartment, besides a small table and 2 folding chairs David had found on the street. She pulled out the $5 bill and smoothed it carefully. David had been so proud to be their provider, even when money was tight. He'd worked construction during the day and sometimes took odd jobs in the evenings or weekends, mowing lawns, helping people move, anything to bring in extra money. Rebecca remembered how his face would light up when he could surprise the girls with a small toy or take them to get ice cream. "You're the strongest woman I know," he used to tell her when she worried about money. "We're going to be okay, I promise." But David couldn't keep that promise now. After dinner, Rebecca ran a shallow bath for the twins. They only had enough hot water for a few inches, but Lily and Rose didn't mind. They splashed and giggled, playing with empty shampoo bottles Rebecca had saved for them to use as toys. Getting them ready for bed was the hardest part of every day. They still asked for Daddy to read them a story. They still expected him to tuck them in and sing the silly song he'd made up about 2 little flowers growing in a garden. Tonight, Rose held up David's old work shirt, the one that still smelled faintly like sawdust and his cologne. "When is Daddy coming back?" she asked, her big brown eyes so trusting and innocent. Rebecca's heart broke a little more. "Daddy can't come back, sweetheart, but he's watching over us from heaven." "Is heaven far away?" "No, baby. It's right here," Rebecca said, touching Rose's chest over her heart. "Daddy lives in here now, with all our love for him." After the girls finally fell asleep, curled up together in their small bed, Rebecca sat by the apartment's single window. The glass was cracked, and she'd covered the crack with tape, but she could still see outside to the street below. She pulled out the $5 bill again and David's note. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded so many times. She traced his handwriting with her finger, remembering how he'd leave her little notes in her lunch when they first started dating. Love notes on napkins, encouraging words on sticky notes stuck to her mirror. Tomorrow she had to go back to work. She had to smile at customers and pretend everything was normal while her world was falling apart. She had to figure out how to pay rent, buy groceries, and somehow make $3,000 appear out of nowhere. Rebecca pressed the $5 bill to her chest and whispered into the darkness, "God, I don't know how we're going to make it, but please, help me take care of our girls. They deserve so much better than this." Outside, the streetlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the wall. In a few hours, it would be another day, and Rebecca would have to be strong again. But, for now, in the quiet darkness of their tiny apartment, she allowed herself to grieve for everything they'd lost, and everything her daughters would never have. Rebecca was trying to fix the twins' breakfast with the last of their cereal when someone knocked on the door. It was barely 8 in the morning, and the sound was so unexpected that she jumped, nearly dropping the bowl she was holding. Lily and Rose looked up from where they were sitting on the floor, sharing a coloring book. They weren't used to visitors. Most people in their building kept to themselves, and Rebecca's family lived 3 states away. David's parents had passed away years ago, and his sister lived in California with her own family. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Rebecca wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the door, stepping carefully over the twins' toys scattered across the small space. Through the peephole, she saw a tall African-American man in his 60s, wearing a dark suit and holding a leather briefcase. He looked completely out of place in their rundown building. Rebecca had never seen him before, and her first thought was that he must be lost. She opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain lock in place. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. The man smiled warmly. "Mrs. Johnson, my name is Harold Patterson. I'm an attorney with Patterson and Associates downtown." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it through. the small opening. I represent the estate of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell. I believe your late husband did some work for her? Rebecca's mind went blank for a moment. David had worked so many different jobs over the years. Construction was his main work, but he'd also done landscaping, house painting, and odd jobs for extra money. The name didn't ring a bell at first. I'm sorry, I don't think I know that name, Rebecca said, still keeping the door mostly closed. Mrs. Hartwell was an elderly woman who lived on Maple Street, on the other side of town. Your husband did some yard work for her about 2 years ago, I believe. She mentioned that he sometimes brought his daughters with him when childcare arrangements fell through. Suddenly, Rebecca remembered. There had been a sweet old white lady who David worked for one summer. He'd come home talking about how kind she was, how she'd insisted on paying him more than he'd asked for. Rebecca remembered him mentioning that the woman would sit on her porch and watch the girls play in the yard while he worked. Oh yes, Mrs. Hartwell, Rebecca said, the memory becoming clearer. David spoke about her. She was very nice to him. The twins had wandered over, curious about the visitor. Rose peeked around Rebecca's legs, while Lily hung back, suddenly shy. Mr. Patterson's expression softened when he saw the children. These must be the little girls she told me about. She said they brought such joy to her garden. Rebecca felt a knot forming in her stomach. Sir, if this is about money David owed her, I need to tell you that we don't have much. We're still trying to pay for his funeral, and, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Patterson interrupted gently, you misunderstand. I'm not here about any debt. Quite the opposite, actually. Rebecca frowned, not sure what he meant. Mrs. Hartwell passed away 3 months ago, he continued. She was 89 years old and had no living relatives. In her will, she left specific instructions regarding your family. I don't understand, Rebecca said, her heart starting to beat faster. In her experience, when lawyers showed up at your door, it usually meant trouble. Mr. Patterson glanced around the narrow hallway, then back at Rebecca. Mrs. Johnson, would it be possible for you and the girls to come with me today? There's something Mrs. Hartwell wanted you to have, but I need to show it to you in person. Rebecca's first instinct was to say no. She didn't know this man, and she certainly couldn't afford to take time off work to go on some mysterious errand. She was already scheduled for a shift at the grocery store that afternoon, and she couldn't risk losing the job. I have to work. Today, she said. This is important, Mrs. Johnson. Very important. If your employer has concerns about you missing work, I'd be happy to speak with them personally. There was something in his voice that made Rebecca pause. He wasn't pushy or aggressive, like she might have expected from a lawyer. Instead, he seemed almost excited, like he had good news to share. Can you tell me what this is about? She asked. Mr. Patterson smiled again. Mrs. Hartwell was a retired school teacher. She taught elementary school for 47 years and never married. She lived alone in that big house on Maple Street, and your husband's kindness meant a great deal to her, especially in her final months. Rebecca remembered David coming home from that job with cookies that Mrs. Hartwell had baked. He'd said she seemed lonely and that she loved watching the twins play in her yard. David had even taken them by a few extra times just to visit, without charging her anything. She left something for you, Mr. Patterson said quietly. Something significant. Mommy, who is the nice man? Lily asked, finally finding her courage to speak up. Mr. Patterson crouched down to the girl's eye level. Hello there. You probably don't remember me, but I met you once before when you were playing in Mrs. Hartwell's garden. You were chasing butterflies, and you showed me a pretty flower you'd picked. Rose's eyes widened. The flower lady with the cookies! That's right, Mr. Patterson said, chuckling. Mrs. Hartwell always called you her little garden angels. Rebecca felt tears starting to form in her eyes. David had been gone for just 2 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. The idea that someone else remembered him, remembered the girls, was both comforting and heartbreaking. Mrs. Johnson, I know this is unexpected, Mr. Patterson said, standing up again. But I promise you, this is something good. Something that could change your family's life. Rebecca looked at the twins, who were both staring up at the lawyer with curiosity. They were wearing their only clean outfits, clothes that were getting too small, but would have to last until she could afford new ones. Their breakfast that morning had been the last of the cereal, and she wasn't sure what she'd give them for lunch. "If we go with you, how long would it take?" she asked. "A few hours at most, and I can arrange for someone to cover your shift today if needed." Rebecca hesitated. Every practical part of her brain was screaming that this was crazy. You don't just go off with strangers, no matter how nice they seem. But another part of her, the part that was exhausted from trying to figure out how to survive on her own, whispered that maybe this was the miracle she'd been praying for. "Can the girls come?" she asked. "Mrs. Hartwell would have insisted on it," Mr. Patterson said warmly. Rebecca looked around their tiny apartment. At the empty cereal box on the counter, the stack of unpaid bills on the table, the mattress on the floor where all three of them slept together because they couldn't afford. A real bed, what did she have to lose? "Okay," she said finally. "Let me get the girls ready." As she gathered their jackets and her purse, Rebecca felt a strange mix of hope and fear in her chest. She had no idea what Mrs. Hartwell could have possibly left them, but for the first time since David died, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things might be about to change. An hour later, Rebecca found herself sitting in the passenger seat of Mr. Patterson's black sedan, watching neighborhoods she'd never seen before roll past the window. The twins were secured in car seats that the lawyer had somehow produced from his trunk, chattering excitedly about their first ride in such a fancy car. "Look, Mommy, the seats are so soft," Rose exclaimed, running her small hands over the leather upholstery. Rebecca had never been in a car this nice. She and David had shared an old pickup truck that barely ran, and even that had been repossessed after he died because she couldn't keep up with the payments. Now she took the bus everywhere, counting out exact change and hoping the routes would get her where she needed to go. As they drove, the scenery began to change dramatically. The cramped apartment buildings and corner stores of her neighborhood gave way to tree-lined streets with sidewalks that actually looked maintained. The houses grew larger and farther apart, with real front yards and flower gardens that looked like something from a magazine. "Mr. Patterson," Rebecca said quietly, not wanting the girls to hear her nervousness. "Where exactly are we going?" "To Mrs. Hartwell's house," he replied, glancing at her with a gentle smile. "I thought it would be better if you saw everything in person rather than trying to explain it in legal terms." Rebecca watched a woman jogging past with her dog, both of them looking healthy and carefree. This was clearly a different world from the one she knew. Did David really work in a neighborhood like this? He did indeed. Mrs. Hartwell specifically requested him after seeing his work at her neighbor's house. She told me she was impressed by how careful he was with her roses and how he always cleaned up thoroughly after himself. Rebecca felt a warm glow of pride. David had taken such care with every job, no matter how small. He'd come home with dirt under his fingernails and aching muscles, but he'd always been proud of his work. She used to watch him from her kitchen window, Mr. Patterson continued. She told me he would hum while he worked and that it made her happy to hear music in her garden again. "He did that," Rebecca whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He hummed when he was content, usually old songs his grandfather taught him." They turned onto a street called Maple Avenue, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. These weren't just houses. They were like small mansions. Each one sat on what looked like acres of perfectly manicured lawn, with circular driveways and gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Rebecca made in a year. "Daddy worked here?" Lily asked from the back seat, pressing her nose against the window. "He did, sweetheart," Rebecca said, still trying to process what she was seeing. Mr. Patterson slowed the car and turned into a long driveway marked by 2 stone pillars. The driveway curved gently through tall oak trees that created a natural canopy overhead. Rebecca could see flower beds along the edges, full of roses and other flowers she couldn't name, but that filled the air with a sweet fragrance even through the closed car windows. Mrs. Hartwell lived here for 60 years, Mr. Patterson explained, as they drove. She inherited the house from her parents and never married. She was a teacher her whole life, but her family had some money from way back. Then the house came into view, and Rebecca forgot how to breathe. It was like something from a fairy tale. 3 stories of pale yellow wood with white trim, wrap-around porches on both the first and second floors, and bay windows that sparkled in the afternoon sun. The front yard was enormous, with flower gardens that looked professionally maintained and a fountain in the center of a circular lawn. "Oh my goodness," Rebecca whispered. The twins were practically bouncing in their car seats. "It's a princess house!" Rose shouted. "Look at the towers!" Mr. Patterson parked in front of the house and turned off the engine. For a moment, they all just sat there in silence, staring up at the magnificent structure. "Mr. Patterson," Rebecca said slowly, "why did you bring us here?" He turned in his seat to face her, and she could see something like excitement dancing in his eyes. "Because, Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Hartwell left this house to you and your daughters." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Rebecca was sure she'd heard him wrong. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "The house, Mrs. Johnson, all of it. It's yours now." Rebecca shook her head rapidly. "That's impossible. People like us don't get houses like this. There has to be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Mr. Patterson said gently. "I have all the legal documents in my briefcase. Mrs. Hartwell was very specific in her instructions." "But why?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely a whisper. "David only worked for her for a few months. We barely knew her." Mr. Patterson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a cream-colored envelope with Rebecca's name written on it in shaky handwriting. "She left this for you. I think it will explain everything better than I could." With trembling hands, Rebecca took the envelope. The paper was thick and expensive feeling, nothing like the cheap notebook paper she was used to. Inside was a letter, written in the same careful handwriting. "My dear Rebecca," the letter began, "I know this must come as a shock, and I imagine you're wondering why a near stranger would leave you such a gift. The truth is, you and your family gave me something precious in my final years. You gave me hope." Rebecca's hands were shaking, so badly she could barely hold the paper steady. "Your husband David was not just an employee," the letter continued. "He was a kind soul who treated an old woman with dignity and respect. When he spoke about you and the girls, his whole face would light up. He told me about your dreams of becoming a nurse, about how you wanted to give your daughters a better life. He was so proud of you, Rebecca, and he worried constantly about being able to provide everything you deserved." Tears were flowing freely down Rebecca's cheeks now. But what touched me most were those afternoons when he would bring little Lily and Rose with him. I would sit on my porch and watch them play in the garden, their laughter filling up spaces that had been quiet for too long. This house has been empty since I moved to the care facility 6 months ago. These gardens need children's laughter again. The twins had gotten quiet in the back seat, sensing that something important was happening even if they didn't understand what. "I never had children of my own," the letter went on. "I spent my career teaching other people's children, loving them, as best I could, but always going home to an empty house. Your daughters reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place, to help children grow and thrive and reach their full potential." Rebecca had to stop reading for a moment to wipe her eyes. "This gift comes with no strings attached, my dear. The house is paid for, and I've set up a trust fund to cover taxes and maintenance for many years to come. There's also money set aside for your education and for the girls' future college expenses. All I ask is that you fill these rooms with love and laughter, and that you remember an old teacher who found joy in your family's happiness. Rebecca looked up at the house again, then at her daughters, then at Mr. Patterson, who was watching her with gentle patience. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's very real, Mrs. Johnson," he said softly. "Would you like to see inside?" Rebecca couldn't stop shaking as she stepped out of the car. Her legs felt like jelly, and for a moment she thought she might collapse right there on the circular driveway. This had to be a dream. Any second now, she'd wake up on the mattress, on the floor of their tiny apartment with bills scattered on the table and empty cereal boxes in the trash. But the twins were already running toward the front porch, their excited squeals echoing across the massive front yard. The sound was real. The smell of roses carried on the afternoon breeze was real. The feeling of soft grass under her worn sneakers was real. "Mommy, look at the big stairs," Lily called out, climbing the wide wooden steps that led to the wraparound porch. Mr. Patterson walked beside Rebecca, carrying his briefcase and a set of keys that jingled softly in his hand. "I know this is overwhelming," he said quietly. "Take all the time you need." The front door was painted a deep forest green, with brass hardware that gleamed in the sunlight. Mr. Patterson inserted an old-fashioned skeleton key and turned it with a satisfying click. The door swung open to reveal a foyer that was bigger than Rebecca's entire apartment. "Welcome home," he said simply. The twins rushed inside, their footsteps echoing on polished hardwood floors. Rebecca followed slowly, her mouth hanging open as she took in the soaring ceilings, the elegant staircase that curved up to the second floor, and the way afternoon light streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the walls. "How many rooms are there?" she asked in a whisper. 12 rooms total," Mr. Patterson replied. 5 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, a library, a formal dining room, and a kitchen that was renovated just 3 years ago. They walked through the house room by room, and with each doorway they passed through, Rebecca felt more and more like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. The living room had a fireplace with a marble mantel and built-in bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. The kitchen had granite countertops and appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. But it was when they reached the library that Rebecca finally broke down completely. The room was lined with thousands of books, and in the center sat a child-sized reading table with 2 small chairs. On the table was a collection of children's books, their colorful covers, bright and inviting. Above the table hung a hand-painted sign that read, "Every child deserves to dream big." "Mrs. Hartwell was a teacher for 47 years, Mr. Patterson said softly. "She always believed that books could change a child's life." Rebecca sank into one of the adult chairs near the window, finally letting the tears come freely. The twins had found the children's books and were already pulling them down, completely enchanted by the bright pictures and stories they couldn't yet read on their own. "She set this up for them, didn't she?" Rebecca asked through her tears. Mr. Patterson nodded. "She spent her final weeks making sure everything would be perfect. She even had toys delivered and put away in what she hoped would become their playroom." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Rebecca discovered bedrooms that were bigger than most people's living rooms. One had been set up as a children's room, with twin beds covered in cheerful quilts and a toy chest filled with dolls, building blocks, and puzzles. "Look, Mommy!" Rose shouted, pulling out a teddy bear that was almost as big as she was. "He's so fluffy!" The master bedroom took Rebecca's breath away. It had its own bathroom with a clawfoot tub and windows that looked out over the back garden. But what struck her most was how peaceful it felt. After years of sleeping on a mattress on the floor with her daughters crowded next to her, the idea of having her own space felt almost impossible to believe. "There's something else," Mr. Patterson said, leading her to a small desk by the bedroom window. On it was another envelope with her name, along with several official-looking documents. "Mrs. Hartwell set up a trust fund. The house is completely paid for. No mortgage, no debt of any kind. The trust will cover property taxes, insurance, and maintenance for the next 20 years. Rebecca stared at the papers, not really understanding all the legal language, but recognizing the numbers. More money than she'd ever imagined having. And there's this, he continued, pulling out another document. An education fund. Enough to cover nursing school for you and college expenses for both girls when they're older. Rebecca had to sit down again. How is this possible? How could one person be so generous? Mrs. Hartwell never had children, but she spent her life investing in other people's children. She told me once that teachers plant seeds in young minds, hoping some of them will grow into something beautiful. Your family was her final gift to the world. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the same garden where David had once worked, watching Lily and Rose chase butterflies among the roses he had planted. She was wearing scrubs. She'd started nursing school just as Mrs. Hartwell had hoped. The girls attended the excellent elementary school in their new neighborhood, the same school where Mrs. Hartwell had taught for nearly 5 decades. The house had come alive in ways Rebecca never imagined. The twins' laughter echoed through the halls every morning. The kitchen smelled like homemade cookies and Sunday dinners. The library had become their favorite room, where Rebecca read to the girls every night before bed. She'd found one more letter from Mrs. Hartwell, tucked inside an old jewelry box in the master bedroom. This one was different. It was addressed to David. "My dear friend," it began. "If Rebecca is reading this, then my plan worked exactly as I hoped. You worried so much about providing for your family, but you gave them something far more valuable than money. You gave them your love, your work ethic, and your kind heart. Your daughters will grow up knowing that their father was a man who treated everyone with dignity and respect." The letter went on to explain that Mrs. Hartwell had been watching their family for months, seeing how David would bring treats home from her kitchen and how he'd talk about Rebecca's dreams of becoming a nurse. She'd been planning this gift for over a year before she passed away. "Love isn't measured in dollars," the letter concluded. "It's measured in small acts of kindness, in hard work done with pride, and in the courage to help others reach their dreams. You gave me all of these things, David. This house is simply my way of making sure your love continues to provide for your family long after you're gone." Rebecca folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the jewelry box. Through the bedroom window, she could see the girls playing in the same garden where their father had worked with such care. They were growing up in a house filled with books and possibilities, surrounded by the kind of beauty and security that David had dreamed of giving them. Every night, she still whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for the house or the money, but for the reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can bloom into the most extraordinary gifts. The $5 bill David had left them was still in her wallet, but now she understood it had never been about the money at all. It had been about love and about a chain of kindness that would continue long into the future in the lives of 2 little girls who would grow up believing that dreams really can come true.